Well, two things. First, I'd read a children's book to my son's older brothers, maybe 10 years before, and it detailed this epic exploration of the French-Canadian explorers Joliet and Marquette. They were on their way west to discover some great river that was flowing north and south that they'd heard from various Indian tribes, heard about from Indian tribes. And I thought it'd be interesting to try that trip again in the late 20th century, 300 years after they took their trip, and find out how's our nation changed, what's it look like, is the wilderness still there, and all of that. And then the second thing was I wanted to spend time with my son. I was taking classes at the time, going back to college, working a couple jobs, and I just really hadn't had as much time with my son Justin as I had with his older brothers and sisters. So those are the two reasons we went on this expedition. You know, he wasn't at first. He didn't know if he wanted to spend that much time working with Dad. We hadn't spent that much time together, and this was going to be every day. Sometimes we were on the water for 8 or 9 hours at a time, fighting waves and wind, all kinds of weather. But he adapted very well. Almost halfway through, we were making our way up the flooded Fox River. And there's a series of towns in the middle of Wisconsin, Appleton, Wisconsin, Neenah, and some other towns all strung together there. And we didn't realize that the Corps of Engineers was letting out a maximum amount of water out of Lake Winnebago. And we were fighting that current and portaging around locks and dams that the Corps had installed years before. And then we got caught in that current, and our canoe was swept over the dam. We almost lost all our supplies. We almost didn't make it out. We swam out. But that, you know, that provided an opportunity that we didn't foresee, of course. The people of Appleton, Wisconsin really came to our aid. There was a woman there who saw us and asked if she could help, and I was really worried about all the supplies we'd lost. We managed to pull our canoe back out of the river. So she called the local newspaper, and a couple of reporters came down, took some pictures, and then the reporter, instead of just asking questions, he offered to help us. And he drove us around to try to get our supplies back. He took us to some stores so we could replenish. And then he took us by his night editor's office. And he immediately volunteered to put us up for the night. We were soaked. We'd swum out of the river in the nick of time. And we spent the night with him. He gave us socks and shirts, and drove us around to a store to buy a tent, and put us back on the river. So without the help of the good people of Appleton, Wisconsin, our journey would have ended there. There were lots of people we met. I think that's probably one of the most memorable parts of the trip, is the people who let us set up our tent in their backyards, took us in, showed us around. A lot of very good Midwestern people out there in upper Michigan and Wisconsin and down to Mississippi. I don't know if I can reduce it to a moment. The whole journey, being out there immersed in nature. I'm a city guy. My son was a city boy. Out there in the wind and rain and sun, cold nights that we could hardly sleep, hot days up in the upper 90s in the middle of Wisconsin and then down to Mississippi, watching wolves chase a buck into Lake Michigan, finding baby raccoons up in an abandoned house along the shore, finding some coyote pups running with their mother, all kinds of aspects of the natural world. It was an experience that I'll take with me for the rest of my life, and I'm sure my son will too. Just the proliferation of nature, and we started in early spring on the Upper Peninsula, and then by the time we were done, we finished in St. Louis, just under the arch, and the changing of the seasons, taking it hour by hour, day by day, the birds, the animals, and once again the people, strange people, interesting people that we met along the way that were always willing to offer us a hand. We had little towns and sometimes big cities along the way, And of course, nature has changed so much. The early part of the trip up along the upper peninsula of Lake Michigan down to Green Bay, Wisconsin, about 300 miles along Lake Michigan. A lot of that's wilderness, the Hiawatha National Forest, other parts of it just full of conifers and fir trees, and it's very wild in a lot of parts of it. And then as we crossed the entire state of Wisconsin, there were the dairy farms, the little cities, the little towns, and then once we hit the Mississippi, you could see how much has changed since 1673. It's an industrialized river. Marquette and Joliet were in danger of their lives. They got captured near the end of their journey by a tribe of Indians. Of course, theirs was much more dangerous than ours. They were going into an area that was totally unknown to Europeans at the time. Part of the way they had Indian guides, but after a while, even the Indian guides didn't know where to go from there. And so they just made their way west along what is now the Wisconsin River, through swamps, and finally out onto the great Mississippi River. And there they were sometimes helped by the local Indian tribes who had heard about these strange white men from the east. And sometimes they were in fear of these men, and at one time a tribe captured them and debated whether to kill them all. But eventually they let them go. I suppose one of the main differences with Marquette and Joliet is that once they got to the end of what was our journey, they had to turn around and go back up 1,500 more miles against the current of the Mississippi River that wasn't blocked by any dams at the time, and make their way all the way up. And their journey, in a way, ended worse than ours. My wife and kids met us at the end of our journey and took us home. Joliet almost died. He got swamped in a rapids near Montreal. Two of his friends were drowned, and some fishermen found him on a rock, knocked out. So he almost didn't make it. Marquette made his way back up to the area of Green Bay and rejoined a mission there, and later made it back to some of the tribes that he had visited in order to carry on his mission. But he came down with dysentery and eventually died on Lake Michigan just about a year later. So theirs was a really tough journey. You had to fight disease, the weather, tribes you didn't know about. The people along our journey were universally kind and helpful. So the Midwest has changed a lot in the last 300 years. Right, there was a tribe that took them in somewhere in what is now Iowa, and they ate bear and dog and wild plums. They were fed well by these Indians and sent on their way. So there were friendly tribes along the way. Well, it gave me time with my son. I learned to love to be outdoors. A city-dwelling, kind of flabby guy, you know, who never got much exercise. I'm planning another trip now in the Rockies with our youngest son. I loved the nature that we experienced. I loved the people that we met. And it gave me some significant time with my son. That was one of the major goals of this journey. No, I'm not much of a sailor. I'd have to learn more than to paddle a canoe. When we took off on our journey, we had almost no experience with a canoe. I wouldn't recommend that to most people. You need to get some experience before you fight the waves on Lake Michigan. But we were very fortunate and managed to get through it all.